As I mentioned earlier, my name is Rebecca Zito. I'm the Senior Manager of Public Affairs for the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority, and I want to welcome all of you here this evening on behalf of the organization. There are several other members, my colleagues from Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority, who are here tonight, all working really hard to make this evening possible. I have Frank Sideri, who is our Chief Environmental Compliance and Ethics Officer. You'll be hearing from him later this evening. He's going to walk you through the presentation that is about our water services, water quality, and our treatment process. It's going to be a really fascinating and engaging discussion. In the back of the room, I have Sarah Hall and Colin Ferrone. They are both with our PGH2O Cares team. They are available to answer questions about your bill and about assistance programs. So if you do have questions about those things, please make sure to take some time to go to see them. Over to my right, there we have Mike Sapinski and Frank Davis. They both work out at the water treatment plant in our lab. They spend all their days testing our water, making sure it is safe and being distributed to you safely and securely. There's also representatives here from our engineering department, who some of you I saw speaking to them earlier, Darby Neidig and Shannon Connell in the back. If you have questions about projects in your neighborhood or just our infrastructure in general, please feel free to reach out to them. And making this evening possible, without their help, this event would not at all have come together, are the folks from our Public Affairs Department, Rachel Rampa, Holly Bomba, and Ross Marcinizin. I hope you all had a chance to speak to them tonight. They are running some of our water experiments, the water bar over here, where you can try different types of water, from tap water, bottled water, and grocery store filtered water, just to see the differences. And Ross was signing you in, and we'll be walking around with a microphone a little bit later this evening to catch your questions. All right, so you might be wondering, why in the world is the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority hosting the water workshops? Well, so last year, we conducted a customer perception survey, and of the people who responded to that, we found that only 39% of those respondents considered the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority to be a high-performing utility. So that number was far too low. Of that same group of people who responded, they were over 90% of them were interested in hearing more from us about the steps we take to keep our source water safe and clean from pollution, and also delivering safe, reliable water services to you. So there's obviously a gap between the work that we're doing and the communication that is reaching our customers. So with that in mind, we wanted to organize an event like this where customers could come to learn more about the water services that we're providing to you, and also get a little bit of information about what we do to keep your drinking water safe. It's also important to realize that the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority is a very different organization than it was 7 or 8 years ago. We have made tremendous progress over those years to reduce lead levels. They are now at historic lows for Pittsburgh. We are also committed to removing all lead service lines from our drinking water system. Since 2016, we have removed more than 11,000 public lead service lines and over 7,000 private ones, and we're well on our way to removing all of them from our system for good. We're also making historic levels of investment in our water infrastructure, our wastewater infrastructure, and our stormwater infrastructure. The improvements that we're making today are going to secure water services now and for future generations of customers. We're also recruiting and retaining a high-performing workforce. We have over 400 people working behind the scenes to make sure that the water services you're receiving are safe and reliable. So at the end of the water workshop this evening, what we're hoping that you experience is an opportunity to learn, to engage, and to ask questions. You're going to hear from Frank in just a few minutes, who is going to walk you through the presentation that gives a really good, solid foundation about our water treatment processes, some of the history in Pittsburgh, and the steps that we take to secure water services. There will be an opportunity for you to ask questions and to share your water experiences. And at the end of the evening, we hope that you leave with a better understanding of the steps that we're taking to secure those water services, have greater confidence in the quality and safety of your drinking water, and also leave with an understanding that the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority as an organization cares about its customers and wants to have a trusting relationship with each of you.
So good evening, everybody. My name is Frank Sideri. I function as the Chief Environmental Compliance and Ethics Officer for the Authority. I sit on our leadership team, and on behalf of all of our leaders at PWSA, as Rebecca said, we welcome you here tonight. I got the privilege of being your host and speaker this evening for a number of reasons. I'm a professional engineer. I've worked in the drinking water field for over 25 years, and I actually sit out at our drinking water treatment plant on a daily basis and work very closely with our water quality, operations, and engineering team. So should be able to, as we get to the questions, guiding you through this. You know, if we do have question, a concern, at the end we'll be able to kind of have a little bit of open discussion. With that said, if as I'm going along, if there's something that you just need a little more explanation on, or maybe I got a little too much science for you, just raise your hand. I'd be happy to spend a couple more moments to make sure that you have an understanding of what we're trying to share tonight. So with that, we'll kick things off. One of the things that we do at PWSA, whenever we have a larger group meeting, whether it's internal or with external folks such as yourselves, we like to start with a mission moment. Sometimes in the construction world, they call these safety moments, and it's really just a time to pause and reflect on a minute before you get on to the business of your meeting. And so the mission moment that I chose here this evening is actually one of our core values at PWSA. And I think it rings true or has a lot of meaning to the presentation and the discussion here tonight. At PWSA, we have a mission of what we want to do as an organization, and that is supported by 5 different core values. This happened again. And the one that we want to focus on tonight is stewardship. And you can see a little bit up there. Stewardship says to us as a public utility that we're responsible for serving as mindful stewards of our water system and continuing to provide essential and dependable water services. And these last few words are extremely important to me and us as an organization. We want to provide those dependable water services now for everyone in this room, but we also need to be thinking about our generations to come. One of the areas that perhaps in the past the authority did not do as much of was invest in the infrastructure and make sure that our water system remained in place for those generations to come, and we're focused on that now as an organization. Some of these projects and things I'm going to be sharing with you are going to be projects that are going to be around for the next 100 years. You'll see in a few slides we have buildings, pipes, parts of our treatment process right now that are over 110, 120 years old that are still being used. Those systems are what we're looking at renewing to continue to be good stewards of our water system. So first off, I'll start here for a moment in what we do in our service area. The Water Authority, Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority, is the largest combined water, sewer, and stormwater authority in the state of Pennsylvania. So we're the largest utility providing all 3 of those services to our customers. The drinking water we're going to talk about in detail tonight. We provide, treat, and distribute the drinking water to the customers, and I'll talk to you about who we serve in a minute. We also, though, do provide wastewater services. On the wastewater side, we convey wastewater away from your homes and businesses and send it to Elkasan for treatment. So PWSA does not treat the wastewater, but we convey it through a series of pipes to get it to Elkasan for their treatment of it. And then we also are a stormwater utility. On the stormwater side, we want to make sure that we're managing stormwater, getting it conveyed into the pipes, into the sewers underground, to get it conveyed away from our streets and our home areas. Some of that stormwater goes to Elkasan, that's called combined sewers. And some of it also goes directly to waterways. So sometimes when stormwater goes into one of those grates in the stream or street, it may go directly into a surface water or a waterway. The areas we serve are up there on the map. In terms of wastewater and stormwater, we actually provide service to the entire city of Pittsburgh. So all of the areas you see in the darker blue, as well as some of this shaded blue down here in the South Hills. On the drinking water side, we serve drinking water to the darker blue area, so the majority of the city. We do not serve drinking water into the South Hills just because of the geography and the elevations that are needed. There's a different water company that provides water to city residents in the South Hills area. We also are providers of water to the borough of Millvale, and we provide water directly to Aspinwall Borough, Reserve Township, as well as Fox Chapel Municipal Authority. So that is the area that we serve. Now, thinking about all of those places that we provide drinking water, I'm going to ask you a few questions along the way. So the first question is, how many people on a daily basis use the water that we produce at Pittsburgh Water? Does anybody have a guess on the number of people we may use or serve? What do you think? Yeah, I'm asking, do you know how many people we might provide water service to? A guess? 10 people? No, more than that. A million? So, some good numbers here. The number is about 500,000. So we have about 500,000 people that we provide water to every day. And so if PNC Park was actually sold out 13 nights in a row, that's how many people that we provide water to on a daily basis. Now this includes residents, folks that live here in the city, but it also includes people that we consider transient populations. So you can imagine there's folks that come into the city to work. Maybe they're here in a hospital or a long-term care home. Maybe they're university students that come in here. Maybe they're tourists or folks from out of town that are staying in a hotel. We tally all of them together, and about 500,000 people are using our services every day. How much water, how many gallons of water do you think we produce at our treatment plant to make sure those 500,000 people have water to drink and flush their toilets and do their dishes and all that? You know, 20,000 gallons? 200,000 gallons a day? Any other numbers out there? 650,000 gallons? We got to go a lot higher than that. On average, we're producing 65 million gallons of water a day. And so if you filled up Acrisure Stadium 13 feet above the highest elevation and made that a giant, cube or pool of water, every single day that's how much water is coming out of our treatment plant to make sure that we get it all in the communities. I don't have a slide up here, but another kind of interesting fact that I like to ask about is, I'll show you in a minute where our treatment plant is. It's up near the Highland Park Bridge, near Waterworks Mall. To get our water from the treatment plant to all that area that we serve, all 500,000 customers, how many miles of water line do you think we need to get the water to everywhere in the city? Anybody have a guess on the miles? A lot? Yes, what do you think? 5 miles of water lines? That was a good guess. I liked it because we actually got a guess. So, I thought it was on my slide. It's not. We have about 985 miles of water line. So that would be a water line that extends from the city all the way to Orlando, Florida. And we actually have about 1,200 miles of sewer line. So we've got a pipe that runs from here to Disney World, and we have another pipe that runs all the way back to Pittsburgh. And so on a daily basis, that's what our field crews are working with. So if you hear there's a break or there's a leak or something, imagine making sure that you're maintaining a pipe that runs from here to Florida and another one from Florida to back on a daily time. So that's the line that we're trying to keep to make sure that we can get water to everyone in the city, all of the 500,000 customers. All right. We briefly saw this a second ago. Last question for a minute. Does anybody know where the drinking water source is? Where do we get the water from for the city?
A.
A? Does anybody vote for D? We got other, that's a different presentation. All right, so A is the correct answer. So the Allegheny River is where our source water comes from. I just mentioned the water treatment plant is up near the Waterworks Mall. Does everybody know where the Waterworks Mall is? Getting some head shakes, right? That was water treatment engineering in 1904. They put the water treatment plant just as the Allegheny River flowed into the city of Pittsburgh. That is, the Waterworks Mall is still the city of Pittsburgh, and that's where the plant is. So back 120 years ago, you put the water plant up there, and does everybody know where Elkasan is? Down in the Ohio River, just as the river leaves the city. So that was good engineering practice in 1905 to put the water plant up there and the wastewater plant all the way as the water leaves the city itself. We're actually in a very good spot to have the Allegheny River as our source water. And you can see a few facts up there, but the Allegheny River actually extends over 300 miles all the way up. It actually goes all the way up into New York State, and then it curves back around into Pennsylvania. So if anybody's ever had a chance to be up to like the Allegheny National Forest, the Allegheny State Park in New York, very rural areas, a very stable watershed up there, and a very good supply.
Is that where it started?
It starts all the way up, yep, there's up in New York. There's a Kinzua Dam up there. Even part of like where Chautauqua Lake is starts to get into some of the watershed, that part of western New York. So we have a very stable water source, so that's good, right? When there might be hot temperatures or droughts occurring, you got to remember that we have a lot of area that's actually bringing water down to Pittsburgh and allows us to have a very stable drinking water system. You know, the river itself, you can see up there, was named River of the Year this year, 2024, by the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. And there's lots of regulations that happen out there in the watershed to protect it, to make sure that our source water is safe as we bring it into our treatment plant to start the drinking water treatment process. All right. Wanted to take a few minutes to talk through our drinking water treatment process so that you can get a feel for what it takes to produce that water, to take river water, change it into potable drinking water for us to distribute out for all of our customers. I think I saw a few of you when you came in. We had some jars and you were asking some questions over here. But we're going to step through this one more time for those of you that already saw it and just talk through that process a little bit more. So the first step that we mentioned was that we get our water from the Allegheny River. On average, about 65 million gallons per day. Does anybody know when we might produce the most water? Our water plant can produce up to 100 million gallons a day. Anybody have a guess what time of year or when we might produce the most water?
Spring.
Summer, spring. We actually produce the most water in the winter. And most of the time that's right after we hear on the news, everybody run your taps because your pipes are going to freeze, right? So everybody in the city turns on their water taps because the news said to let it trickle a little bit because we're going to have a cold snap. And because of that, we have a lot of people using water all of a sudden. And that's usually when we see actually the highest amount of water. In other cities, other areas, the summer is the right answer. People use it for irrigation and things like that. We don't use as much irrigation water here in Pittsburgh. We actually have a fair amount of water most of the time here.
At what point do you get the water when you take it out the Allegheny River?
Yep.
Where do you actually get it from? What point? Around what town?
Yep, good question.
What?
So the question up here, just so everybody could hear, was what point or where do we take the water out of the Allegheny River? So the water from the Allegheny River comes out of the pool that's right above the Highland Park Dam. So if you drive over the Highland Park Bridge ever, there's actually a dam that's underneath there. And that forms kind of a pool in the river behind it. And our water treatment plant sits right there. So it's directly across from the Waterworks Mall, where the water plant is. There are some points on the river. They bring the water in. The water there is 25 to 30 feet deep. So they bring the water in from that pool directly into the treatment plant. So that's the first step in there. And the water from the river can have a bunch of stuff in it. Has anybody seen the river water maybe? Sometimes when it's rained, have you seen like golf balls floating in it, parts of docks, leaves, sticks, trash? Unfortunately, some of that stuff is in all of our rivers. And so that is what we're pulling in. We're beginning to treat the water and remove all of those contaminants to turn it into drinking water. We do have some pumps. We pump the water once. We actually lift it up in the air. These are really large pumps. So you can imagine if you all took 1 gallon of water and we walked up these 3 flights of stairs 65 million times today, that's what these pumps are doing. They're lifting that water about 3 stories in the air, 65 million gallons of that every single day. The pumps that we have in here are from the 1930s and the 1950s. These pumps have been running for quite a long time in our Ross pump station to lift the water in this first stage of the process. Once the water's lifted and in the treatment plant, that begins that treatment process. And the words that I use and we use to describe it is a multi-barrier treatment process. And all that means, and you're going to hear me talk about it, is we have several different steps to treat the water to make sure that we maintain good quality water. So you can imagine if you only had one way to do it and something went a little off with that or you needed to do some maintenance, you could have a compromise. To avoid that, you're going to see we have several steps where we treat the water to make sure that there's several barriers to protect the water and continue to make it a clean source. So the first step we actually have is, it's called a physical step. It's our screens. And so the screens are they're about a 1/4 inch mesh that sits in the water. And that then basically strains out any of the chunks, right? So leaves, a piece of trash, a little piece of plastic bag, a stick, whatever it may be, we want to screen that out first, right? Nobody wants this type of stuff in their water. So the screens is the first physical treatment step. And then the next step is a chemical treatment step. Have any of you ever played with magnets, with pluses, minus magnets? Anybody plus, minus? Yeah? What happens if you stick 2 pluses together on the magnets? What do? They go right. They don't want to stick together. And what if it's a plus and a minus at the same time? What do? Boom, right together. You could be a water treatment plant operator, young man. That's what we're trying to do. So we're doing this with chemistry. So all of the particles in the water that make it look kind of brown or discolored, those are different types of molecules. Organic molecules, silt and dirt. They all have a charge to it, just like if you had a balloon, right? Has everybody done the static electricity thing? Or rub it on your leg, sticks to the wall. All of those particles have a charge. So we add some chemicals to the water that actually help stick stuff together. And what we actually form is something, we call it flock. And that flock, my jar is getting all shook up here, but that flock then takes a lot of those colors and allows those particles to actually become heavier than water, and they'll begin to settle out. And it's kind of hard to see. I'm going to stir it up so you can see a little bit of it swirling around. But once we do that chemistry and let this water sit in what we call clarifiers, all of those particles will slowly settle out to the bottom, and we take that sludge and we actually send that to Elkasan for disposal. But we then end up with what's called clarified water on top. And again, it's hard to see in this jar because we've shaken it up and not let it settle. But in that next step, we're adding chemicals as a chemical barrier, and then we're doing settling in our clarifiers to remove all of those silts and sands and organic molecules in that particular step. Once it leaves our clarifiers, it actually goes underneath the waterworks mall over to our sedimentation basins. Have any of you been on Route 28 and you kind of maybe seen those big ponds that sit behind Waterworks Mall? Does anybody know what I'm talking about? There's like some lakes that sit right along there. If you haven't, next time you're driving along Route 28, kind of behind Aspinwall, you'll see what we call our sedimentation basins. And these just basically allow the water to settle even more. The water goes into those basins. If anybody's had a jar of dirty water and you set it on your windowsill, right, the longer you let it set, the more stuff settles out. And so we continue to use those basins to settle out smaller and smaller particles in our sedimentation basins. All right, fun fact, because I like doing things that aren't on the slides. Waterworks Mall. Does anybody want to guess why Waterworks Mall is called Waterworks Mall? Because the water plant's there? Okay, good. The water plant was actually where the mall is right now. So if you were here before 1960, hanging out up there in Aspinwall Borough, the Waterworks Mall was a giant sand filter. So originally in the early 1900s, when we treated water, we pumped water from the river. It went straight into the sedimentation basins, those big open ponds, so all the river dirt could settle out. They filtered it through some sand, and they sent it out to the distribution system. So that was the water treatment system up until the 1960s, when the current water treatment plant was constructed, some of the buildings were there, and then that Waterworks Mall became a development essentially. But the sedimentation basins are still in use behind there. Once the settled water leaves, the settled water starts to look pretty clear. So I know my one jar hasn't fully settled out, but you can see on the right-hand side how clear that water is. And that's basically the clarity of the water that we get after it's sat in those sedimentation basins. And probably to you or me, or if I use my transition lenses correctly, I can actually look in it. You know, you might see some very small particles in here, but probably not. But there still are some very, very tiny particles that are in here that we need to filter out. So this isn't quite ready for drinking. Our next step is actually to pass that water through some sand and carbon filters. So we have 18 filters. They are about 30 inches deep, so they're up about to my waist, full of sand and anthracite. So anthracite is just hard carbon or hard charcoal. These filters, when I say we have 18 of them, one of them is about the size of this room. So if you took 18 of these rooms and lined them all up, that would be the size of our water filters to pass that 65 million gallons of water through. And what's happening with those filters is as those small particles go through, they basically get stuck on the particle of sand. There might be some of those plus and minus charges like we talked about, where particles actually, just like a balloon is stuck to the wall, they get stuck to the particles, and we begin to filter out particles that we can't even see. We get very clear water and clean water that comes out of the filters themselves. Is there a question in the back? Can you repeat, Rebecca? So, oh, the membrane treatment plant? Is that what you said? No. So, yep, good. Okay, hang on. So the question that I got asked in the back was about one of our other treatment plants that we call our membrane filtration plant that sits up in Highland Park, I believe. There's another water treatment plant that is up there, and it was used for a period of time to treat water from the open Highland 1 reservoir. That's different than this. That treatment plant is actually after this treatment plant we call our Aspinwall water treatment plant. Yep. Okay.
How do you change that?
Yep, so how often do we change this media? We don't actually change the media very often, but we backwash it or clean it. So about every 100 hours, we actually send air and water backwards up through the filter and kind of rinse it all off and wash away all of the dirt that was captured on there. So about every 100 hours, 3 to 4 days, we clean this media and we can continue to reuse it. So this is capturing and polishing all those final particles out. Now, did you have a question? Okay, so question was equating this to when they go camping, they push some water through a filter, right, to clean it, to clean the water. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, so very similar. So this media, if any of you have a filter at home, maybe in your refrigerator, we can talk a little bit later about like a Brita or a water pitcher filter. If you look inside of those filters, they often have media similar to this, and it's a very similar process. Sometimes if you have a media at home and you might get a little black discoloration that comes off from it, that's just the coal or the carbon dust that first rinses off. But it's a similar type of filter, just we have very, very large ones. So once the water's gone through the filtration step, it's still not quite ready to drink. So this looks like drinking water, but there still is potentially some bacteria in here that could cause intestinal problems, stomach issues. So the final step, the final barrier in our treatment is a chemical step where we add a small amount of chlorine to the water, and the chlorine itself then disinfects the water. So it inactivates or kills things like viruses, Cryptosporidium, and Giardia. So these are different types of microorganisms that can cause stomach issues. So we disinfect the water with chlorine. We actually also add fluoride for dental health, and we add another chemical called soda ash that is used for pH adjustment. And so I say soda ash. Sometimes people get nervous about some of the chemicals or questions. Has anybody ever used baking soda? Yeah? Soda ash is baking soda. So we add a little bit of baking soda to the water, just like you add it when you make a cake to make it fluffy and change the pH of the batter. We add a little bit of that to the drinking water to change the pH of the drinking water as our final step. So even though sometimes I mention chemicals, you use chemicals when you cook at home and other places. And soda ash is one of those that we use. The other item that we do use, and I'll mention later, is we also add a chemical called orthophosphate that I'll share with you a little bit more in a minute. And that orthophosphate is used for our lead program. Once all of those is done, the water's treated, and we then begin to send it out through that 965 miles of pipe. We have 13 pump stations. We have several different water storage tanks and reservoirs because there's lots of different pressure districts all throughout the city. As you drive around, you might not see where your water is coming from, but because of all the hills, valleys, and rivers, we have to move the water up and down to all of those different points, and we do that through multiple different pump stations and storage tanks to get it out to everybody in the community. Now, the importance of drinking water. So I talked to you about the process that we currently do. This little graph up here we pulled from an old book. And for those of you who can't really see it, I'll just show you what's going on. The dates here started in the year 1900, so 124 years ago, and they go out to 1912. So this is a graph from 100 years ago when this was done. And it shows on the side the cases of typhoid fever in Pittsburgh. Typhoid fever and cholera were types of waterborne diseases that you can get from untreated drinking water. And you'll see that it's actually pretty high in the beginning, 1900 through like 1907, and then it drops way down. This is the importance of drinking water treatment and the essential really public health role that we play as a utility. This drop down corresponds with filtered water. So in around 1904 to 1907 was when the drinking water treatment process started in Pittsburgh. In this picture, it's a little hard to see on here, is actually a picture from, I think it's 1905 or so, of when our clear well was constructed. So right along the Allegheny River, we have a tank that holds 40 million gallons of water, and that's where we do that disinfection. And that tank has been there for 120 years, treating the water in the city. But this is the importance, starting all the way back in the early 1900s, to make sure that we're providing for public health in the city through treated drinking water. Today, that same commitment remains for us. You saw me mention stewardship at the very beginning as one of our core values to make sure that both now and future generations were committed to providing drinking water. This is where some of this commitment comes from. We have a fully accredited laboratory, so out at our treatment plant we have a lab staff, and on a monthly basis they perform over 3,000 tests of your drinking water. Some of those tests are out here in the community, some of them are from our tanks and reservoirs, a lot of them are back at the treatment plant, making sure that that water production system remains safe. So 3,000 times a month we're testing the water in the city. We always have folks at the treatment plant, so whether it's a holiday, a rainstorm, a Sunday, there are at least 3 people there, 3 different operators, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, making sure that, again, that we're monitoring the water system. And there's many more of us that are on call for emergencies. So on Monday, was it Monday that we had the bad storms come through? Some people are still without power. We actually lost power momentarily at the treatment plant, and electricians came in, I came in, other people responded. So there's folks that live right here in the community that are committed to making sure that that treatment plant continues to produce water during events such as a power outage or a bad storm. And we also do have a water quality and environmental compliance department. When I mention water quality, that's staff that are dedicated to making sure these tests are being done, making sure that we comply with regulations, submitting all the required paperwork to the DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection. And I, in my spare time, oversee the environmental compliance department. We manage everything but drinking water to keep our organization running. So you can imagine, as kind of a treatment facility, we have air permits, we have waste, recycling that needs to be handled. We have our own sewer discharge. We have our own stormwater discharges that we have to deal with. We have over 100 chemical storage tanks that we have to manage. We do all the inspections of all of our pump stations and everything. So we have a group that kind of is almost an oversight of the water treatment process in the Environmental Compliance Department. So we've got lots of eyes on our system, continuing that commitment to keep our drinking water safe. Looking ahead, I showed you that picture from 1905 when that clear well was built. A couple of times I've mentioned how old some of our infrastructure is. We have a water reliability plan right now that we're executing, and later this summer, hopefully, we'll be going out to bid for it. Around $170 million worth of construction on this one set of projects. It's going to upgrade pump stations that were built in 1911 and 1931 that are still operating today. So you probably won't be driving your car for 110 years. We're still driving our pump stations for 110 years. These are important, and these are part of that stewardship to make sure that we're updating the system to continue to supply and distribute water for those future generations. The other important piece of this project is we're actually going to be installing a bypass around that clear well. All of the water from the city flows through our clear well, and we do need to upgrade and maintain that clear well tank. And the only way to do it is actually to bypass it so that we can come in as a future project and remove that tank and reinstall it. So that'll be beginning under design here in the next couple of years so that we can actually replace the clear well itself. And so there's more information on these. We can talk about them later. There's actually a little graphic up here behind me. So if you have questions on some of our improvements that we're doing, certainly you can let me know and I can help you out there. Lead service lines. This is another commitment that we've made, and we're actually probably leading the country in our response in reducing lead lines. I was just this last week at the American Water Works Association's annual conference, and people from PWSA were presenting to peer utilities across the United States about our lead service line program and the efforts that we've done here as a model to other utilities. We've replaced over 11,000 lead service lines to date, and we're continuing to issue contracts to replace more of them. We have a couple of different mechanisms that we have for lead service lines. We're replacing both public and private side lead service lines as we come across them. Our approach on the lead service lines has been to target areas where we know there's a lot of lead service lines, but also areas that have susceptible populations. And there's things we do looking at blood lead levels, looking at the population, the age of the populations that live there, looking where we can get the most kind of, we'll say, most impact in doing a project. So we are working through different neighborhoods. We may or may not have been in some of the neighborhoods you're from or live in, but we are working through the entire city to make sure that we get the lead out and eventually get to remove all of those lead service lines and identify them. The other thing, though, that we've done just as important as removing the lead service lines is we've begun to perform corrosion control. And so this graph here shows lead levels for everybody looking. It starts back in 2016. And the important thing to look at is the line itself. So in 2016, we actually saw lead levels in the system that were above the regulatory limits. So this is showing 15 as the regulatory limit. So back in 2016 and 2017, we were seeing lead levels above those regulatory limits. And that's what has caused us to take action. So in addition to removing those lead service lines starting back in 2016, we did in 2019 add orthophosphate. This is a chemical we add to the water as what's called a corrosion control inhibitor. Orthophosphate forms a coating on the inside of pipes, both the service lines that go into houses, but it'll also form a coating within a home's plumbing system too. And what this actually does is it prevents the leaching or the movement of lead particles from a pipe into the drinking water itself. So it's almost like a protective barrier. And as I mentioned, this is not only the lead service line, but this is inside homes. So we're replacing outside, but people's homes still may have lead pipes inside your house. You might have that old brass fixture in your house. Your house might have been constructed with leaded solder. There's different things that inside of your private home may contribute to lead. And by us adding this chemical helps provide that barrier to provide you further protection even inside your private residence. But you can see what's happened when we've added this orthophosphate. The lead levels now are well below the regulatory limit, and actually the DEP here this last year has designated that we are now optimized, meaning we have gotten our lead levels down to a controlled point, well below that regulatory limit, and we're going to be able to continue to use our orthophosphate system to provide that control while we're working through finding those remaining lead service lines. Now, I mentioned chemical names before. Orthophosphate, some of you might be like, what's orthophosphate? Another name for orthophosphate is phosphoric acid. Has any of you ever had Coke? Anybody have a can of Coke? So Coke has phosphoric acid in it. So it's just it's a chemical that has a very low pH, just like orange juice or something. And it's that low pH in there. It's a food grade chemical that makes that coating. So again, just because you see a big science word there does not necessarily mean that that's something to be concerned about. It's actually providing that barrier to provide protection in our drinking water system. All right, yes, question.
So those filters for your home, do they help with elimination of that?
Yep.
Of the lead and
Sure, good question. So the question up front here, just so everybody here, was in regards to the filters for your home and if they help with protection with lead. So these questions have come up in some of the other sessions we do, and they're good ones, so thank you for asking. The one thing I would say is if you're buying a filter or you have a filter for your home that you're looking for some type of filtering for water, whether it's lead or something else, make sure you look at that filter on the packaging and that it says NSF on it. So NSF is a third-party organization that actually tests the filter to make sure that the claim, the manufacturer, filter manufacturer X removes lead. You want to make sure that it says NSF to confirm that that filter the marketing is correct. Assuming you have a filter that's appropriate for lead removal, and we hand out filters that are sometimes, we always hand out filters that are appropriate for lead. Sometimes we hand them out to homes that might need them. Those filters can be effective.
is that include water softeners?
Water softeners will not remove lead. So that was the other piece, is there's different types of filters that will do different things. So a water softener is a home treatment device. It will not affect lead. It removes other things like calcium and magnesium, what we call scale, things that might form like white crusts on your fixture. Water softeners will help with that. There are some types of water filters out there that may only deal with what we call as taste and odors. So they're a type of filter that, if some people might not like the taste of the water for some reason. There are taste and odor filters that are specifically for removing those type of compounds or molecules in the water. There are ones that are specific for removing lead and metals. So if you're concerned about lead in your water, if you're concerned about lead in the water, PWSA has a home lead testing program. So you can reach out to us, we can send you a sample bottle, you can get your water tested, and we can provide some information that can help you inform on that. 1 second on the two questions, I'll get you. And then the third type of water filter, just to do it, is we do have types of water filters out there that are meant for bacteria only. And so sometimes if you're immunocompromised or if you're in a hospital, you may see a filter that's there for people that might be susceptible to a certain, like Pseudomonas or some type of bacteria, I don't know. So just make sure you know what type of filter you're using. So 2 filter questions maybe.
When you guys were in the Lincoln-Livingston area, y'all were doing something with our water, and y'all gave the pictures that had the blue little check your water and the filters. I'm trying to see how I can get my hands to be able to purchase those filters, because I love the water picture.
Okay. So afterwards, let's connect and we'll get you set up with the information you need. So correct, if we're working in a neighborhood where we might be disturbing service lines that could contain lead, or we verify that they do, or we've replaced your lead service line, we may need to provide the homeowner a pitcher filter so that they can filter their water until that disturbance passes. So we can provide you some information on the types of filters that were provided. They're a pitcher filter, they're meant for removing lead, they're only good for a certain amount of time. That filter eventually reaches its capacity and then needs to be replaced. So, and then one other filter?
My question was about the frequency of lead testing at home. Like if we've tested our lead, our water, should we repeat it like every couple of years?
Sure.
Or
So the question up here was in terms of in-home testing for lead. If you've tested already, should you be testing on a frequency, every couple years, or is there a recommendation? Generally, I would say there's not. Once you've done a test, probably retesting is not going to get you too much more information unless you've made a change, right? So the water that's in your home plumbing system, when you run that test, and if you follow the instructions in terms of letting it sit, that's going to tell you what's in the pipes in your home and what your potential exposure is. Unless you change your pipes or do something like that or do some type of plumbing thing, the source of the lead's probably not going to change too much. Now, with that said, if you have some underlying health condition, you have very young children in your home, or you have other concerns, I'm not saying don't do it, but the main thing is that your home plumbing system will dictate that concentration of lead, and so if you get that one test, you can usually make a pretty good decision based on that. So, okay. One other question, yeah.
I want to just piggyback off of what you
Sure.
said. Because you said that you test like 3,000 tests a month.
Yep.
So does that include lead as well?
Good. Yep, so the question up front was, I mentioned earlier that we do about 3,000 tests per month, and the question was if that includes lead. There probably are a few lead samples mixed into that. A lot of our tests are more on the water quality in terms of bacteria, chlorine, pH, turbidity, the cloudiness of the water, so we have a lot of other tests that we're required to do. We do some lead tests mixed in. We have required periods of time when we do lead testing specifically, and you can see some of these. So these were like twice in 2016, twice in 2017, so every 6 months we were doing them for. We're now, because we're optimized under a regulatory standpoint, the DEP does not require us to test as frequently, but we plan on doing our own additional testing more frequently than the regulations. So we do some periodic testing, but it's more on, I'll say, like a quarterly or semi-annual basis. We will do other lead tests as customers send in samples or ask for additional, or if there's a construction event, there's some other testing we do for special events. So, okay? Yep.
I can go and buy water for Family Dollar and test it. Now, this is Silver Falls water, and it will read 0. But if I go home and I check my water coming out of my faucet, it may read, well, today it read 93 contaminants. What do you consider a good reading coming out of the faucet?
So the question up front here was if he went, and we're going to talk about bottled water here in just a second, but he buys a bottle of water, tests it, gets a number or 0, and then tests his home water. I think you said you get 93. My question before I can answer that is, what are you testing for?
I just want to know what the contaminants are.
Right, but so, and maybe we'll have to talk offline. So every test has its own, like, what we would consider a safe number, right? So if you were testing for chlorine, 0 chlorine is not good. We would want to see chlorines maybe around 0.8 to 1.5 milligrams per liter for chlorine. If you were testing for turbidity of the water, 0 is good. That means there's no particles in it at all. We usually are looking at like 0.03 or something like that. If you were testing for pH, you're going to see numbers that might be like anywhere from some types of bottled water might be like 9.5, which I don't think is good, down to something closer to neutral like 7.0. You might be, with those numbers, testing for something called total dissolved solids possibly, or TDS. It's a measure of like calcium and magnesium and sodium and potassium. And that itself also depends on the water. So if you have still water, in still water, you've gotten rid of all of the total dissolved solids. You've boiled off all the water, you've left all the minerals behind, and you're going to have 0. But some people don't like the taste of still water because there's no minerals in it. So in that case, a 93 might mean there are some minerals in it, and that's fine. So we would really want to understand what the parameter or what the chemical was that is related to that number to tell you a little bit more about it. And I can afterwards, we could talk about it, or you could share with me later and I could help with that. So, all right, we're going to, one more question.
How much microplastics in our water?
How much microplastics in our water? All right, so question on microplastics in the water, and the answer is, I don't have an answer for you. And here's why, most of the microplastic testing and the results that you're seeing is research level testing. So there's not a test for microplastics right now that is standardized or used in like the regulatory framework. So a lot of that test is coming out of specialized research labs. We've actually looked at it. Mike Chapinski over here has looked for some of those tests. And it's something right now that we call it an emerging contaminant. So it's something that we are trying to pay attention to and look at. But I can't give you a number, unfortunately, because there's no commercially available test methods for microplastics right now. So, okay. There are, and you'll hear me talk about it here in a second when I get into tap water, generally studies out there, not studies for Pittsburgh, has shown that there is more microplastics in bottled water than in tap water. Okay, and there's actually just a study that I saw here a couple of days ago in email. That was a university, a research level study, and they had looked at bottled water. And I think they found like 3 times more microplastics in bottled water than what they were getting from taps. Now that's not here in Pittsburgh, that was their university research study. In a slide or two, I'm going to share a little bit more about bottled water and kind of contrast that, and everybody can get a little better idea of why there might be more microplastics in bottled water. Do you got one question? All right, if everybody can handle one more, what do you got?
What's like the most like poisonous one that they're holding?
What's the most
Purple, like most harmful thing?
in water?
Yeah.
So the question, the question was, what might be one of the most harmful things in water? So I don't know if I can give you a good answer for that because it's probably going to depend on the person. So if you're looking at untreated water, like untreated river water, the thing that's probably going to be what we call the most acute, give you the problems the soonest, are going to be types of bacteria, right? So if I drank this, I would probably not have a good night tonight because of the bacteria that are in here. So there are acute types of impacts in untreated water. Beyond that, in drinking water, under the regulations, there's nothing in there right now in terms of the regulatory levels that we have to find that are necessarily acute or going to cause you immediate issues or chronic issues, okay? So there are other things we could talk about in terms of what's in untreated water, but bacteria, I would say, would be the biggest concern in river water. All right, we're going to move on here to keep things going along. I'm going to change a little bit here from the water treatment process, and I do want to talk a little bit about the importance of drinking water tonight, as well as we're going to touch, as I mentioned, on tap and bottled water. So not a lot of time on this slide, but I think it's all important for us just to reflect on the importance of drinking water and water in general, right? We all need water. I poured myself a little cup up here. Hopefully some of you have it. It makes up most of our body. It cleanses our body. It keeps some of our natural systems going. But having water is important, right? If you're in a community that doesn't have water or doesn't have a clean source of water, there's usually underlying issues there. And so we want to make sure that we're thinking about the importance of drinking water. And a question to go along with that is, how much water do you think is recommended on a daily basis? How much water should you be drinking? A? B? B? The answer is actually C. So around 11 to 16 8-ounce glasses, so not a huge glass. For men, it's about 124 ounces or 3 or 4 liters. For women, 92 ounces, 2 to 3 liters of water. This is not just like, so I go to the gym. This isn't just like the guys walking around carrying a 1-gallon jug of water, chugging it all day. This is water that you might get from, maybe you made water in your coffee or your tea, you got some water there. A glass of water, maybe there's another drink. So this is water in general that you need to make sure that you stay healthy. Hopefully we all can't argue that we need some water to drink. I was talking with a group of 5th graders from one of the local schools, and they suggested they could live on orange juice. But it actually takes a lot of water to make orange juice, between growing the oranges, processing the oranges, making the oranges, refrigerating the orange juice, all of that stuff. So I eventually talked her down that she can't brush her teeth with orange juice, and we still need water. They did not want to give up their cell phone, so the 5th graders still thought the cell phone was more important than water, which I'd also suggest that the water's more important. All right, we mentioned some bottled water, and actually already talked about some bottled water that was bought and had zero, maybe it was TDS. It's important to think about different types of water. So when I stand up here and say tap water or trust the tap, This is referring to a publicly disclosed source water, either groundwater or surface water. So Pittsburgh Water provides tap water. I just told you it comes from the Allegheny River. It's produced here in Pittsburgh. We provide a water quality report. That's tap water. If you've had spring water by definition is water that comes straight out of the ground to the surface. So this comes from a well or a borehole. So this is somebody, you know, in a mountain or someplace on the hillside, water's coming out of the ground and they capture that and call it spring water. If you're drinking purified water, that can be anything. There's no rules about what a company can call purified water. It could be tap water that they just put in a bottle. It could be water they got out of their gutter, I don't know. But purified water can be any type of water. Distilled water was what we talked about a second ago, or sometimes if you go to a restaurant, they might say, do you want still water? That's water that's basically been evaporated and recondensed. So if any of you have like done your teapot too long on the stove and all the water has evaporated off and you're left with all those white crusty minerals in there, you've basically distilled the water. All of the pure water has come off as steam. In distilled water, they capture that steam and resend it into a bottle. So I actually had an opportunity to work in Aruba at their drinking water treatment plant for a year. That's what they do. All they have is salt water. They boil the salt water, they still off all the clean water and leave all the salt minerals behind, and then they use that water as their drinking water supply because they're a desert essentially. But that's what distilled water is. Question?
If you're dialysis or you're a food facility person, what are these waters, or which one of these waters are?
Sure, good question. So her question was, what if you're on dialysis or some other condition? Are one of these waters better for you? I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that as a non-physician, to be able to advise you on that level of water. I would say, though, if you are concerned, probably to talk with your physician about that. What's that? I know what water is good, but I'm not an expert in dialysis and kidney disease to be able to provide. Right. So. Okay. So we're going to move on. Cause I'm not going to be able to give medical advice. I will say there's lots of different sources of water. If you have a medical concern about a health condition, you probably should talk with your physician about that. The last one here is glacier mountain water. So if you have a bottle that says any of that, again, that can be from any source. So even though it says glacial water on it, it might not be coming from a glacier. It could be coming from any source. So you really should be thinking a little bit about your bottled water sources. The one thing I will share with you is that PWSA is produced here in the community by people that live here. We provide a water quality report. We, I think, have some back here. We actually just shared it publicly. It's on our website. Every year we're required to provide information about the quality of the drinking water. And if you're grabbing a bottle of water, I'd ask you, do you get that same water quality report? Do you know that bottle you bought, if it was bottled in Pennsylvania, if it was bottled in Fiji, was it bottled in Michigan? All of those questions, you trust that because it's in a bottle, but bottled water is regulated differently than the tap water that we get out of the drinking water. So do think about that a little bit. Again, as stewards and people that are here in the community, we care about the drinking water supply, and we're here to have these type of meetings and be able to talk with you about the water quality that's out there. Last slide, well, second to last slide before I wrap it up. Since I'm an environmental person, I wanted to throw this out. The other thing about bottles that we should think about is the amount of environmental impact that they can have. And the two interesting ones that I'll just point out up here is one, it takes 3 liters of water to make 1 liter of bottled water. And that's really because there's lots of water that's going into actually making the plastic, making the lid, transporting it, making the label. All of that consumes water besides what's actually in the bottle itself. So from a water conservation standpoint, the water that's available here comes out of your tap. We're not using all of that plastic to transport it. And the other thing really is to look at the cost of a bottle of water. I know we can have discussions, you can ask about water bills and that they've gone up along with all of our other bills. Certainly are there to do all these infrastructure renewals. But if you really look at that bottle of water you bought for whatever it is, maybe if you bought it in a big pack, it's 99 cents for a liter, or maybe you bought it in, I just told you I traveled, and a bottle of water at the airport was $6. But if you look at the cost of that compared to what a liter of water would cost out of your tap water is significantly less expensive than bottled water. I know we all probably need some bottled water once in a while for convenience. You're at a sporting event, you grab it. But I would certainly continue to emphasize you can trust our tap water, you can trust the quality of it, and if you can use a reusable water bottle to use your water, then I think it puts you further ahead. So, one question. Yep. What's that? Yeah, there's a smell. Okay. So, question in the back was, what if the tap water has a smell to it? Okay. So, if the question was, what if the tap water has a smell or smells funny?
It smells like somebody that gas. It smells funny,
So, if you're, so some people may be sensitive to odors or taste. So some people may have different sensitivities or reactions to odors and tastes. And that can be something that is personal to some degree. So just like you don't like one brand of orange juice, but you like another brand of orange juice because they taste different. So that certainly is kind of sometimes personal preference. I grew up not in the city, I grew up in a rural area, and when I first came to a city, not here, but a city in general, the water tasted different to me. You probably have done the same thing. If you've traveled to some other area, you've had the water there, you might be able to taste a little bit of difference in water. Now,
The water over there smells.
yeah,
Right now.
so, okay.
Now, the water you have on the table has to smell.
I'm not telling you that you can't smell the water. All I'm trying to work through is that there are different perceptions of how water smells, and I'm not saying that you don't think the water smells funny or not. Now, where some of those odors can come from are a couple of different places. So the odors themselves or a taste can and often do come actually from the building plumbing system, right? So if the water is mixed sometimes with your hot water tank, the sulfur smell could be from stagnant water or water that's sat in a pipe or a hot water tank that hasn't been maintained and has sat for a while. It can impart some of those odors in there. Drinking water fountains sometimes can impart an odor, or if you haven't changed a filter for some time. So these are all things that can potentially change the odor or the taste. There are not regulatory limits for odor and taste because they're considered aesthetic. So just because the water necessarily tastes a little odd to you or smells a little funny doesn't necessarily mean it's not healthy or unsafe to drink. But I would suggest if your home or the area you're using the water, if you think it has an odor or a taste, there may be a filter out there. I just mentioned those taste and odor filters, that maybe that would be an option for you to make the water more palatable for you and your facility. If all of that is south and you think there's an issue with your water in your system, I would say reach out to us. Our laboratory, Michael loved me for this, our laboratory takes calls and they do go investigate concerns. They might flush an area, maybe there's a dead-end street or something where the water needs to be moved through a little bit, and we'll look into that. So if it's a persistent problem, let us know and we can come out and take a look and confirm that the water's still safe or if there's a concern to it. But yeah, I can't say, personally, if somebody smells or tastes something and the other person does, often people have to. It's just sometimes. And so a lot of times that could be, again, the movement of the water. Maybe it didn't sat for a long time on your street because people weren't using it. Maybe it sat in your hot water tank. When you turned your water on, you got a little hot water. So there's some different reasons for it. But if it's persistent, let us know. I think we would like to take a look at that and see if there is a concern in the system. So, all right, I'm going to wrap up here. A couple of takeaways just to share on the screen, just to review what we spoke about this evening. 65 million gallons of water from the Allegheny River, a very good and stable source for us to provide water to the city. We have that multi-barrier treatment process that we talked about to make sure that we have several steps. Over 3,000 tests we're performing on all of that water to make sure when it leaves the plant and as it goes out through the distribution system that it remains a good quality water. We reviewed and had some questions and answers on our lead service line program Those continue to be at record lows, and we continue to remove lead service lines. And then we wrapped up a little bit with the importance of drinking water and some of the regulations and the water quality reports that we have for tap water. And so that was all I really had to share tonight. If there's other questions, I can answer them. Yep. One more.
Is there a difference between purified water and distilled, even if they both of them read 0 contaminants?
Yeah.
Is there a difference?
So the question was if there's a difference between purified water and distilled, even if on the test you're using they read 0, there still could be. So that the test that you're using might only be measuring the amount of dissolved solids. And so distilled water is going to have 0 total dissolves, and purified may too, but there still may be other things in the water that you'd have to test for. So there could be a difference between the two. All right. Do you want to ask a question, or are we done? Yep. In a sleep machine? Yeah. So the question in the back was about using distilled water in a sleep machine, like a CPAP, a sleep apnea machine. Okay. So distilled water itself, as I mentioned, is water that they removed all of the minerals from. So again, like you can think about if you boil your teapot down, you might get some white minerals that are left behind. So the concept of using distilled water in a CPAP machine, or even if you use it in like a humidifier or something, is so that you don't have those minerals kind of gumming up the inside of the sleep machine or the gumming up the inside of your humidifier. So still water just will prevent that hardness or that scale from forming inside of your machine or your humidifier. Okay? Yep, question?
So technically, distilled water is safe to drink water.
So the question is if distilled water is safe to drink water. This borderlines on a health question. So what I will say is distilled water, you can drink it, but it doesn't have any minerals in it. So if you rely on distilled water, you're going to be getting no minerals into your body, calcium, magnesium, and salts. And so, like I mentioned, I worked in Aruba in their plant. They distilled everything, but they then remineralized it, adding in calcium and magnesium and phosphorus, because distilled water may not be the best long term. But if I drink distilled water today, I'd be fine. If you Right, yeah, if you use it for making coffee and tea, it won't scale up your machine. Emergency water, yeah. Yeah, so. One.
Now, the old pipes that you had in the ground were lead. What are the new pipes you're replacing?
Yep. So, question is, in terms of the pipes in the ground that we're replacing, most of the pipes that are in the ground today, there's two different things going on. The water mains, the larger pipes that are in the main part of the street, are either cast iron or ductile iron. They're both hard forms of steel. When we replace them, we're usually replacing them with ductile iron, so with steel. The ones you're thinking probably about is what we call the service line. So that's the small pipe that runs from the street into a home itself. Those could either be copper, galvanized steel, or lead are most likely the ones. When we're replacing those, we're either replacing them with copper or with what's called PEX. So PEX is a plastic type flexible line that is approved. So it's one of those two depending on when you got your line replaced. I think we're mainly doing copper now, but there was a period of time where we're using PEX for the service line. Okay? Yep.
What is the determining factor of when those lines are going to be replaced? A certain
The lead service lines, yeah. So the question was, I don't know how many people are listening still. The question was, what was the determining factor for when a service line might be replaced to a home? So as I kind of mentioned, we have a couple of different ways that those are happening. We have some specific programs that are targeting areas where we know there's a lot of lead. So we want to spend our money effectively, try to replace a street where we think there's 80% of the houses are lead. So that's kind of the first target to get those done that way. The other time they're getting replaced is when we're replacing the main line in the street. So if there's a main line somewhere where maybe there's been a lot of breaks, we're replacing that, and as we replace that, we will replace lead service lines if we come across them. And then beyond that, because it may take a couple of years, if you're in an area where there's not a lot of lead service lines, you can also have them replaced on your own, and we have a program, a reimbursement program, to help with the private and public side reimbursement. And you can talk with our CARES team in the back. They can kind of give you an idea. We do have maps online that you could, I don't know if they have them access here, that you can find your house, and you would be able to see what service line you have, and it might be able to provide you some information. So, all right, I think I've lost everybody. I'm signing off from the video.